when these naturalized players, these heritage players, come to Southeast Asia, they already have a good quality football education from their countries of origin, whether it's in Australia in Brendan Gunn's case, or Germany in Stefan Schrock's, or England in Etheridge's case. You can see that there's a vast level of difference between them and the local born. These days, when you look at the various national teams around Southeast Asia, some of us were now wondering, why do we have this kind of player in this our national team? It's like, this guy is obviously not born from X country or Y country in this region, but they are playing for our national team. And it does confuse, because naturalization, like it or not, has taken such a firm roots in this part of the world that countries, even the highly respected ones, the top ones, they are now using it to beef up their national teams and to strengthen the quality in pursuit of their varying agendas and their varying destinations where they want to go in international football. And actually, in this topic, we are going to look at naturalization in Southeast Asian national football teams. And with that, we begin by talking about how did it actually all come about, where this naturalization comes forth. When it comes to naturalization, it was actually a thing, an idea that actually really began by Singapore in the early 2000s, particularly after the then Singapore Prime Minister actually talked about wanting Singapore to go into the World Cup by 2010, which obviously never happened. But with these foreign players, actually, we did actually produce our best World Cup qualifying result to date, second only to Chu Sing Kui's 1977-led Lions in the World Cup qualifying held in Singapore. So, part of the then Prime Minister's desire was actually, after watching the World Cup in 1998, he was looking at the winning France national team, where they had several players that hail from different parts of former French colonies, who use their physicality, their intelligence, the training that they have gained in the native France, and the roots they have from their ancestors to complement and to blend into a winning team, whether they are formerly Ghanaian, Cameroonian, or even Armenian. Yes, then they complement with the natural French people, as probably what the one segment of the political sphere would like to put it. So this is how the naturalization process, in a way, helped France to win the World Cup in 1998. And with that idea, actually, in the wider spectrum of things, the foreign talent sports scheme was actually introduced, I think, around 2000, to actually help Singapore achieve its global sporting ambitions by inviting the best, the most promising foreign sports talents to come to Singapore to train, to play, and eventually earn a fast-track citizenship process to represent the Crescent and the Five Stars. So football is actually one of the sports that utilized heavily on this in that period, and actually Singapore was the first national team in Southeast Asia to use this, when they recruited Brazilian-born Ekmar Gonçalves, Croatian-born striker Milko Grabovac, and English-born then defender Daniel Bennett. These were the first three players to be actually recruited into the national team as so-called foreign talents, as naturalized players. Although the initial process didn't go well for Singapore football, it was particularly after Radi Avramovich, the former Singapore national coach, when he took over the Lions job in 2003, that he decided to further utilize the process. Some parts through the Young Lions Truth Train, where he got majority of the foreign talents to actually come through and play for the national team. Subsequently, in this period, among them you got Agu Kashmir, Iftimi Dixon, Precious Imajurari, or formerly from Nigeria. Then you have Shi Jiayi and Chu Li, who previously hailed from China. Then Farodi Mustafic was already playing in Singapore for a few years when his fellow Serbian compatriot Avramovic actually contacted him to convince him to turn out for the national team through this project as well. Then you also have John Wilkinson, who actually got his citizenship after marrying his Singaporean wife. Alexander Durich, who got his citizenship the natural way actually because beforehand he had been playing in Singapore for at least a decade, and he was actually a permanent resident. He was actually a permanent resident prior to becoming a citizen, thus becoming one of the oldest international players to turn out for the national team in that period. Yes, I know I was rattling all these things because I saw through that period of the naturalization process that happened in Singapore. And thus, actually, Singapore indirectly became the butt of the joke in the national team, where we were the ones who rely on all these foreign talents, we like to call it, or foreign mercenaries as outsiders would call it, or foreign players as some of them would also like to call it in this period. Like, at times we will have up to 7 naturalized players in our starting 11, and it was actually quite obvious the impact. Actually, with them, we won 3 ASEAN Football Federation championships, or as they call it, the ASEAN Championship as it's known now, and we nearly qualified for the Asian Cup 2011 Qatar. I mean, with just 30 minutes to spare in the final qualifier in Amman, Jordan, when Noor Alamsyah equalized for us, but unfortunately Jordan scored a winner, and we were eliminated. But in that period, actually, we saw Singapore gain a lot of respectability in international football, in Asian football, where we were always sparring against Middle East opponents thanks to Abramovich connections. We were competing against some of the better middle tier teams in Asian football, and even strong opponents never underestimated us. They did not take us for granted, that because they knew that we could offer a surprise or two if they were not careful. So that was the impact. Our world rankings actually rose quite a bit during that period, and obviously there was quite a bit of coverage of the Lions during that period, because not just in locally there was but international there was increased coverage of the Lions, because you know that we were doing well in Southeast Asia, we were making an impact in Asia through these players, and also in the world. So they begin to notice like how you get these naturalized players to play for us and actually to eventually perform for your country. So with that, actually Singapore became the early success story of naturalization in Singapore. Although once these players, as they definitely have to grow old, they do grow older as all human beings do. They eventually get old, they do retire, and actually the legacy behind in Singapore's case, yes, I will repeat about that again later in this video, that some of them stay on to become coaches here. They love the country, they felt that Singapore gave them a much better life, and they wanted to give back in return. However, in some other cases, it is they decided that, well, there's nothing they could do better. They decided to go back to their country of origin to continue living as though they have actually never played in Singapore for that period. They still have memories of good friends, memories of playing in Singapore, playing with the national team, with their teammates, and at times, maybe in the case of Chu Li and Shi Jiayi, turning out against their country of origin actually in a World Cup qualifier, China. So, talking beyond my own home country, we move on to another country that actually began the naturalization experiment very early. Actually, a bit later than Singapore, but they were quietly doing this in that period too. So going on to the Philippines, actually they began this program of naturalizing the players. Prior to that, Philippines actually they were never a force in Southeast Asian football, and they were regularly eliminated early, whether it's in the Southeast Asian Games or even eventually in the AFF or now as we call it the ASEAN Championships. Apart from the odd semi-final in the 1991 SEA Games, which they will host, and a creditable 2004 Tiger Cup campaign, which actually saw the first what would eventually become a fully naturalized national team. Actually, this naturalization for the Philippines, unlike Singapore, is more of getting all the heritage players who are eligible to play for the Philippines, whether it's through their parents or grandparents, as is indicated in the current FIFA rules, to get them to play for their country of kin, I think, rather, or adopted nation. So among the first few heritage players to actually begin to play for the Philippines included the Young Husband brothers, Phil and James, who actually featured for the Philippines under-23 team in the Southeast Asian Games. Even though the under-23 team did not progress into the semi-finals, but it brought a quiet wave of revolution that would change the course of Philippines football in the course of the next decade. So from the Young Husbands, from the Great Witch Brothers, and you move on, there were many more that eventually came as more and more heritage players began to join the flock, and eventually you got almost a full squad of heritage players who come from different parts of Filipino diaspora, who actually come from different parts of the world, whether even from Japan, from Europe, mainly the UK, Germany, Denmark, or even in America. That's where actually, if I make a slight digression, that's when the majority of the 2019 Women's World Cup Philippines squad came from. Yes, the naturalization thing also have a impact on the women's side, but that was a slight digression. But coming back to the men, it took a lot longer, and from this group of players, they actually steadily grew to become a force to be reckoned with in Southeast Asian football. And the first moment where Philippines make the whole region and Asia pay attention was in the 2010 AFF Championship, where they actually stunned Singapore in a 1-1 draw with Neil Ettridge in goal, who was so unstoppable that apart from the opening goal by Noor Alam Shah, no one else could score. Neil Ettridge was really unbeatable, even though he was in the fringes of the Chelsea academy. But he's really unbeatable. He is really unbeatable. He is a top class goalkeeper who has played in the higher tier divisions in the UK before he moved to Buriram this year. Still, it was with this collection of these heritage players that Philippines make history by appearing in the AFF Championship semi-final for the first time in their modern football history. And from there, they move on, make couple more semi-final appearances, and eventually reach the pinnacle when they reach the finals of the 2019 Asian Cup finals held in the United Arab Emirates. And by then, you got to call the Young Husbands, Stefan Schrock, Daisuke Sato, and quite a number of others. And all these, and much of the credit through that period came through because of this gentleman called Dan Palami, who actually used his resources and his time to scout for eligible diaspora players from in Europe who are able to commit to play for the Philippines national team. So, with the Philippines and Singapore as the early examples, actually now I'm going to touch on why do these countries, why does Southeast Asia national teams now touch a lot on naturalization? There are a few points to talk about, and actually one or two of them, actually some of the parts of it, a few parts of it, they are repeats of what I've actually mentioned previously in the earlier segments where I talk about the two countries who are the pioneers of the naturalization scheme in Southeast Asian football. The first one is actually when you talk about whether it's the heritage players or the naturalized players, when they come to this part of the world for the first time, they actually bring a higher quality knowledge of football. Local players do have their own qualities, like Thais. The Thais actually they do have a good quality of technical skills. They have knowledge on how to play the football on the ground, and they are very conversant on how to play on the how do I put it? I mean, the local Thais, they are very proficient in playing the ball on the ground, and they are very adept in playing slick football as a combination. But when it comes to at times in the national team football, especially when you play against teams outside of Southeast Asia, particularly the East Asian giants, South Korea, Japan, or even the Middle East teams who are actually more physical, they are decently technical, although a few of them are a lot more technical, and they have raised their standard in Asian football over the decades thanks to a lot of investment in infrastructure, in youth development, limitless amount of money pouring to ensure that this generation of young budding footballers will become players who succeed at the highest level of football in Asia. But that aside, I come back to the naturalization of players in Southeast Asia. Why is this such a trend? When these naturalized players, these heritage players, come to Southeast Asia, they already have a good quality football education from their countries of origin, whether it's in Australia in Brendan Gunn's case, or Germany in Stefan Schrock's, or England in Etheridge's case. You can see that there's a vast level of difference between them and the local born. The local born have the technique, they have the speed, they have that local knowledge and know how to work with the local players. But when it comes to playing internationally, these characteristics alone are insufficient. You need players who have the in-game knowledge, who know how to cope with the intensity of the opponents, which sometimes locals are very overwhelmed by. Sometimes you have very lopsided defeats, such as one notorious example when actually Indonesia lost to Bahrain more than 10 years ago, 0-10 in Manama, and Malaysia having suffered a huge defeat, although partially due to player rebellion, then 0-10 at the United Arab Emirates. So with only local players, there's only a ceiling that the national team can push. Southeast Asia is you can always win your regional version of the World Cup, but beyond that, Asian Cup or even the World Cup, it's quite a pipe dream. I mean, to reach the Asian Cup finals until recently, partially through the tournament expansion, had been a pipe dream. The last time you see 4 Southeast Asians national teams reach the finals of the Asian Cup was actually in 2007. That was before the most recent edition. In 2007, these 4 Southeast Asian nations were co-hosts, and that was, I think, the first or second. This was the most recent time that Southeast Asia actually hosted the Asian Cup, and it was a very rare 4-nation co-hosting format that gave them automatic entry. By contrast, in the recent 2023 Asian Cup, these 4 national teams, qualified by merit, and with significant differences also. But I come back again to the essential points of naturalization. With these foreign-born players, they have the smarts, they have the know-how, having been trained since young to play against similarly physically tougher opponents, fast players, everybody fighting to earn a professional contract in their home clubs, in their countries of origin. That's such a competitive environment where they knew that if they don't win a contract, they're done for. And several of them actually were dropouts from the academies where they were trained, they were taught all the basics, all the essential elements of how to play as a professional, how to play in those various positions before they were released, because the contract to enter the first team of the club where they were trained, the percentage is very small, and very few can go in. Never mind your academy scholars like Fai Bokia, Fai Bokia of Brunei. You also have your young husband brothers who were released in different batches because they did not make the cut at the first team level. They were a bit below, I mean, at that level. But still, even at that lower level to the Chelsea first team under Mourinho, they're still a lot better than the local Filipino players or the other local born players in that, because they have spent their teen adolescent years fighting for a place in the first team, learning how to be competitive, even on the pitch where you have to use their physicality, use your knowledge, the know-hows, how to be street smart on the pitch, feel smart on the pitch, to fight, to play, to win, the desire to compete. That gives them the ability to transfer it onto the fields in Southeast Asia, where they are able to use their physicality to impose themselves, to provide cover for their local teammates who are faster on the wings, especially in the central areas, but also to provide a different dimension to the game that otherwise our local bonds are not very used to. Yes, thanks to globalization, we watch a lot of all these things on Premier League on television and other top European leagues, but it's not the same as watching them compared to playing live on the ground. I mean, if I digress a little bit, just imagine Haris Harun, because I think if I remember 2019, I watched Haris Harun duel with ex-Manchester United and Everton midfielder Marone Fellaini at Larkin Stadium. You can tell the difference in quality straight away. Haris Harun, local born, spent much of his career in Singapore and Malaysia. Fellaini, yes, people laugh at his stint at United, but he has played at the pinnacle of the Premier League. He has played for the national team, in World Cups, in Euros. The difference was very astounding. Haris Harun, for all his efforts, could not find a way to get past, to stop Fellaini in the middle of the park. That is an illustration of that local born versus foreign talent concept. Although Fellaini is not eligible, but I'm using this as the example on that gap where you can see, and this is what these players, as you can see, especially from Indonesia, what they bring onto the national team these days. That, I mean, to the point that some people remark that Indonesia is better known as what, your Netherlands Team B or Team C, or I personally may liken it as the 21st century Dutch East Indies national team again, like what happened with the Dutch East Indies national team in the 1938 World Cup. And actually subsequently over the years, as the football associations in Southeast Asia realized the usefulness and the capabilities of using this naturalization process and using the heritage or the diaspora path, better quality players actually subsequently came forth. Thailand's first notable naturalized player was actually a under 17 World Cup winner with Switzerland, Shahrul Shapuis. But thanks to his Thai ancestry through his mother, he actually eventually moved on to play for the Thai national team and has become a recognizable name in the Thai football scene. But his quality and that winning mentality that you can only get by playing with the juniors who also have this level of training and exposure, and some of his teammates from that Swiss team eventually went on to play in the World Cups and Euros at this high level. Shapuis was eventually playing at this level, at the national team level, but still, Shapuis played an instrumental role in pushing the Thai national team up. Already formidable in Southeast Asia. Thailand is that formidable, yes. But Shapuis brought this winning mentality, that instinct to not just fight on the pitch, but to battle, to win in terms, to outwit your opponent with better skill, better technique, and better positioning, crucially positioning, to make sure that their opponent does not get past you, but instead you get past your opponent and provide that decisive pass, or to start the move that will lead to the goal. And And because of these players, especially those Dutch players that have recently joined the Indonesian national team, from whether it's in the Eredivisie or as far as the Major League Soccer, Martin Pace, his goalkeeping straight away stood out because his level is a lot higher than the previous first choice goalkeeper, the local born. It's that wide. And it does make a difference, especially when you play against stronger teams. Stronger teams will no longer say, I can't field a reserve 11 or I can't change my lineup anymore. I have to field my strongest team because they are that competitive. They have reached that final round of the World Cup, which also was Indonesia's first time in their World Cup qualifying history. Then these opponents will have to think again. Hajime Moriyasu will have to do the same when they travel to Jakarta to play Indonesia, Japan. And it makes them a force, a respected opponent that the Asian giants will not take it lightly. Never mind the world. Talk about Asia first. And that's that first step that these FAs want to push towards gaining respect from opponents, from adversaries on the pitch, through pushing through the FIFA rankings, pushing through various barriers that previously fans would think that it's unachievable, to make these local fans dream again. After these years of looking at local born players, I mean, they work hard, they play with pride for their country of birth, but sometimes the limitations, they are quite painful, and this naturalization process does heal this aspect of it. In fact, when it comes to the most recent 2023 Asian Cup, which was played in January in Qatar this year, that time there was a data that actually erroneously said that Malaysia and Hong Kong were the joint top with 14. Actually, Malaysia has only 13 naturalized players in the squad. Dominic Tan, to clarify, is not a naturalized player. He has always been a Malaysian since birth, as I mentioned in the book Raw Football Legends of Singapore. He was born in Singapore to Malaysian parents who were working in the country. And even though Dominic Tan attended Singapore Sports School for his education, he had never thought of changing allegiance, because and eventually actually returned back to return up north to actually play professionally for Malaysia and eventually for the Malaysian national team. So that is a caveat that has to be clarified. Dominic Tan is not a naturalized player. Others who came through, some of them actually, thanks to Lee Seng Fu, who actually did a series on a few of these prospects when he was editor of the then 442 Singapore Malaysia Prince magazine in that period in the mid 2010s. I mean, among them you got Darren Locke, Daniel Ting, I think, Junior Estelle, and subsequently a few others as well. So he had a part to play in getting these naturalized players had some attention that led to the Football Association Malaysia noticing and bringing them on board. And what makes naturalization so effective for Southeast Asian national teams is you cannot just collect a collection of players and just play. You need a good coach who is able to push them to that level, because now these coaches do feel motivated that now I have these players. These players are at the level that I've been at as a former player or as a coach. And now I feel that I can finally push these players to where they should be, given my experience, given their experience in these different parts of the world coaching. Singapore's case was with Radi Avramovic. Indonesia, former World Cup coach for South Korea, Shin Tae-yong. He has been instrumental in reviving Indonesian football and internationally at an unprecedented scale. Malaysia with Kim Panggon. And who else? Philippines, actually, they went through a few coaches, but these several coaches that went along the way, they were also instrumental, but it also helps that the players had a desire to want to play eventually in the Asian Cup, which they finally did in 2019. But citing these few examples, you also need these coaches to be able to push them to these limits, to fire them up, to make sure that they're ready to play against this this higher quality opposition at the level they know that they can actually play at instead of regressing, which is always a danger when one gets very used to living in this country, to enjoy the lifestyle, to want to give back after spending so many years playing in the local league. Like what Cambodia has been curiously doing by having two Japanese players naturalized after having actually a heritage player in notably Thierry Thierry Bin Chanata Bin, I think Thierry Chanata Bin, I think, if I'm not wrong that name. Yes. And when you have these players who are able to lift various aspects that is lacking in various departments, whether it's defense, midfield, or striker, even Thailand, they get naturalized their defenders because they know that their defenders are not strong. Vietnam, goalkeeper, Tang Phang Nam, notable example. So you make tweaks to make them stronger so that you can push higher instead of remaining stagnant where they are. And part of this benefit, I think, for me, in my opinion, is actually when you have these naturalized players, you actually do push the local bonds that say, hey, if I want to stay in the national team, now I have to perform to their level. Because if I don't, maybe I may end up having to be in a so-called B team, which rarely exists these days, or even worse, out of the national team altogether. But then once time does pass, people do grow old, players grow old too. And once they reach an age where they decide that they are done with playing international football and subsequently professional football altogether, they fade away. What happens? The naturalization policy will not last forever. For a few FAs, it's probably a short-term project or a mid-term project at best. Because, like for Dan Palami, his ideal is to give Philippines football some respect in Asia. That's why he searched for players of Filipino diaspora. For Eric Toh here, he got this place. He wants to quickly raise the standing of Indonesian football as the federation president, but he also has political ambition ahead of it because he also happens to be a full minister in the previous Jokowi administration and now in the current Prabowo administration. But once these naturalized players leave, what happens? In Singapore's case, we decline. We decline tremendously because the subsequent generation of players who came up are really not up to scratch. And they struggle because without a proper chain of youth development, you can't produce players who are able to push things gradually higher up. Malaysia, they have decent batches of young players at times coming through, but if you don't keep qualifying for these AFC under 17, AFC under 20 youth tournaments finals, in these finals regularly, you're not going to make inroads because if you don't qualify for these two tournaments, it's going to be quite a struggle to qualify for the Asian Cup because once you know that this is the standard you need to be at if you want to be at least in the top 16 of Asia, then you know that qualifying at youth level is one way to go. Then you talk about Philippines. Despite qualifying for the 2019 Asian Cup, their youth system for now remains very weak. How weak? The Philippines under 23 national team have never qualified for the semi-finals of the SEA Games since that format was introduced back in 1997. Never qualified for a single semi-final. Think about that. Then you have Thailand, always dominant. What next after these defenders leave? Are we going to get better defenders if they are going to be training only locally but are not sent abroad? No. Gone are the days where national teams can just gather, go 1 month to a training tour in Europe or some cases Australia or even Japan, Korea in the more recent past, or maybe even as wild, but probably a bit wilder, even South America, just to get your teams ready for major tournaments at that level like the SEA Games. No, it doesn't improve the team straight away these days. No, given the globalization, given the new the scientification of football, no, it doesn't work this, and the evolution of training and coaching in the sport these days? No, it's really not like that. So naturalization does provide a short-term gap, and usually a short-term gap, to plug gaps on the weaknesses, to cover up, or some cases cover up the real issues that is in their respective youth development. But after that, once it goes, fans will always worry. Are we going back to square one? Are we going back to the struggles, given the financial outlay you put in so much to get these heritage and naturalized players to play for the respective Southeast Asian national teams?